Good morning and welcome to today's webinar, Revisiting Brexit. I'm Miranda and I'll be presenting alongside Unsworth's Commercial Director, Charles Hogg. This is a follow-up to our November webinar where we looked at the implications of a soft, medium and hard Brexit and how each scenario could affect your supply chain. The recording of that webinar is still available and much of the information is still relevant. So we can provide the link to the recording if you would like to revert back to that also. In the months since that webinar, particularly in the last few weeks, the government have announced information and changes affecting importers and exporters from the 29th of March. We'll be sharing the key information and actions that you need to take to protect your supply chain from day one of our exit from the EU. Following the webinar, you'll receive a link to the recording so you can watch again or forward to colleagues and contacts that you feel may benefit. We'd like to make the webinar as interactive as possible, so you can submit questions, comments at any time throughout the webinar using the chat box feature, which is on the right of your screen, and we'll of course try to get through as many of these as possible during the Q&A at the end. We wanted to make sure that we took the time during this webinar to address some of the concerns that you and our clients have put forward. I must point out that the information and guidance within the webinar is Unsworth's interpretation. We are by no means a training provider, but we do have some actionable and realistic advice that will support your Brexit planning. Every business is different, and I would encourage you to complete the Brexit questionnaire we'll be sending out after the webinar if you require some more tailored advice specific to the challenges faced by your business. I know we've got a number of current clients on the call, but for those of you who don't know much about us, we thought it would be appropriate just to share a little bit about Unsworth. We understand the challenges faced by importers and exporters, and we work tirelessly to simplify trade for our clients and drive positive change to their supply chains through innovation and efficiency. We've been working closely with clients, especially over the last year, in supporting their Brexit planning. Our commitment to innovation and change in the industry can be demonstrated in the industry recognition we've received. We're dedicated to simplifying supply chains by providing solutions that add value for our clients. So coming on to the main agenda, as a hard Brexit becomes ever more likely, we'll be focusing today on customs requirements, the potential issues at borders, and also sharing what we've done for current clients to minimise the effects of Brexit on their supply chain. We're going to start with a poll question, so you should have one coming up on your screens now. How familiar are you currently with TSP, which is the Transitional Simplified Procedures? And while you select your answers, I'll just explain a little bit about TSP. So HMRC has put in place these Transitional Simplified Procedures in the event of a no deal. I'll explain a bit more of what the process looks like once we have the poll results through, but essentially it will make it easier to import through Ro-Ro ports and to pay duty on deferral in the following month. And before I go into any more detail on that, let's take a look at the poll results. Okay, so we can see that some of you are somewhat familiar, some of you might have heard of it in a recent announcement by the government, and some of you are not familiar at all. If you haven't heard of it, if you're not familiar at all, don't worry, we're going to go through what the requirements are, what it is and what it means for you in the coming slides. So what you'll need for TSP, it's a simple online registration process, and we encourage all importers to register. You'll need an EORI number, company details, VAT registration and contact details. And also by the 30th of June, you'll need to have a customs comprehensive guarantee, which guarantees the duty amount payable when deferring. Customs has laid out a standard goods procedure, which essentially includes a pre-declaration, which must be done prior to goods arriving at the border. So for goods entering via UK via Dover, the pre-declaration needs to be done before the goods reach Calais. The vehicle won't be able to cross the border without the reference number from that pre-declaration. So the information that you require for TSP, you'll need the date and time of arrival, the commodity code and the goods description. If you're not sure about the commodity code, there's lots of guidance available online to ensure you're selecting the correct one. Unsworth also can offer guidance as a value-added service for our clients. You'll also need a purchase or sales invoice. You'll need the customs value, which is the value of the goods, including freight and insurance. And this can be included on your invoice or as a separate document. Serial numbers, delivery details within the UK, and supplier contact information will also be required. So once the goods have been imported, you'll need to submit a supplementary declaration by the 4th working day of the following month. This needs to include everything imported within the previous month. If you're familiar with the CFSP customs procedures, this will be very similar. It confirms what you've put in your initial declaration as correct, and therefore the duty amount that you owe is also correct. So just a reminder here to submit your questions, keep them coming through on the chat, and we'll come to as many of them as we can at the end. And I'm going to pass over to Charles, who's going to speak to you a little bit more about the Dover contingency update.
So thank you, Miranda. We've all hopefully seen the sensationalist newspaper headlines, but what do we really need to be getting ready for now that we've had announced these simplified processes and procedures with the Ro-Ro ports? It's also worth bearing in mind that it's likely for the first 1 to 3 months that if we do end up being in a no deal scenario, delays are likely. We want to ensure that your business is ready and also better understand how your plans are developing and also where we can help as a business to support you. TSP is being announced as the potential congestion solver for the challenges that Dover and the Channel Tunnel will be facing. In our last webinar, we looked at the 4 million vehicles that pass through these Ro-Ro ports every single year. And even if 90% of the importers were to utilise TSP in the first few months, it would still leave something like 800 trucks that could potentially be stopped at the border. For some importers, TSP will not be deemed appropriate, or even they will not be allowed to use it as an entry mechanism. It is likely, actually, that the queues of trucks will start to form on the Calais side, leading to further complications. And also, it needs to be pointed out that as this webinar is solely focusing on the UK side of customs, as a business, considerations for what will happen in terms of the EU entry or exit customs declarations need to be considered. We can help you here if you need us to. In terms of exports from the UK, what will the process actually look like? Data here is going to be king once again. We touched on improving our ability to produce this data in our last webinar. And the data that's going to be required to produce the NES declaration, which will have to be submitted by a freight forwarder or customs agent, and also the safety and security declaration, which will be linked to the NES declaration given the movement reference number, which once again will have to be submitted by a freight forwarder or customs agent. A lot of the data between these entries and exit entries will be repeated. It will also be worth bearing in mind that the EU import data will be very much the same. We at Unsworth can submit the NES and ENS on your behalf. Please do get in touch with us if you do need some pricing in this respect. The actual mechanics in terms of at Dover still need some ironing out in terms of arrival and departures, but in terms of the actual process, there is now clarity. What we wanted to do quickly was to retouch on a question that we asked at our last webinar, which links to how has your company increased its stock holding as a Brexit mechanism for de-risking. So since October, we've engaged with dozens of importers to look at how they're increasing their stock holding. At Unsworth, we have something like 12,000 pallet spaces immediately available across our warehousing locations. So let's have a quick look at some of the poll results. So we can quite clearly see that 50% of you on the call have increased stock holding, which is great to see, and 20% are still planning to. What we would point out at this stage is the fact that buffer warehousing is under pressure, and also it's on a first come first served basis, but there are still many locations still available that we have access to. Also, since October, we've engaged with many importers to relook at their inbound flows, in particular moving their flows away from the congested southern ro-ro ports up to the northern inventory link ports, where there is better infrastructure and also geography in terms of motorways to access the ultimate delivery point. What we actually have seen great success on is performing this intermodal switch, and we are very happy to put forward a proposal that avoids Dover and Eurotunnel and utilises northern port infrastructure. We also have a case study of a customer that approached us since the last webinar and what we've been able to achieve with them. We touched on the poll in terms of buffer warehousing, and we are continuing to work with many customers. In fact, some 20% of you on the call are still planning to utilise buffer warehousing. We currently, as of today, have just under 12,000 pallet spaces available for storage. On the outbound side, in terms of exporting customers to get them ready for the NES requirements, we've been working very hard in this respect. However, the biggest area for work still remains around the EU import entries into Germany, as an example. So one of our customers post the last webinar asked us to put together a proposal in terms of how we can utilize an intermodal switch. What we actually did was to map out some of their supply chain flows, and if we focus on one particular flow, which was a daily full truckload movement from a factory in Poland through to their warehousing site in Middlesbrough, their origin factory had limited storage space, so we required a daily loadout. And also it was a custom made product, so the customer couldn't just buffer warehouse within the UK to satisfy demand and deal with the Brexit scenario. What we actually developed was a full switch from the truck to full container loads that actually come through northern port of Immingham. We also now can give the client full visibility. Transit time has only increased to 4 days. And also in terms of drop and swap of equipment, it actually enables on-site factory storage prior to dispatch. Hopefully the most exciting result was not only the financial savings of just under £100,000, but also a CO2 reduction in emissions across the year, and also the complete de-risking of all their cargo away from what we are considering the high risk, high delay ro-ro ports of the south, being Dover and the Eurotunnel. The customer is now looking for us to expand this model across all of their European production sites. What this clearly shows is really just by a simple switch, the significant savings, and also in terms of the flexibility this gives to a supply chain. And what we want to do as a business is to be able to put forward these proposals to you to take to your boards so that we can work together to de-risk this whole scenario. What we want to touch on now are some of your questions that have been coming in throughout the course of this webinar, and we're going to come on to them now.
Okay, so the first question comes from Darren. He's asking, as a business, we export to France weekly. How will the new export process affect us? Can we make our own declaration without a freight forwarder?
Sadly, the answer is no. The NES declaration has to be made through the ICS, which doesn't really have that sort of standard user interface. So you either need to invest in expensive software and some expertise, or really appoint a freight forwarder or customs agent like ourselves. This has been actually quite a common question that we've been asked over the last few weeks. What I would also say is that we are getting in quite a number of questions at the moment, but please do continue to submit them. And if there's any that we can't get round to answering, we will come back to the individuals via email.
So next question from Connie is, what will happen to Intrastat once we leave the EU?
So hopefully most people on the webinar today understand that Intrastat is really a trade system for collecting information and producing statistics on the trade of goods between countries of the EU. We understand that in a no-deal scenario, this will no longer be used by the UK.
And the next question from Kate. So how can Unsworth support on getting my business ready for a no-deal Brexit?
Well, there's quite a lot Unsworth can support in terms of getting your business ready. And one of the biggest things that we've been working with customers over the last 3 months, and especially most recently now there's some clarity across the RoRo borders in terms of removing the delays, is in terms of actually talking to us, sharing your supply chain flows and working with you in terms of moving away from the high risk, high delay ports. One thing to bear in mind that we all have to be clear about is that deep sea imports could also be delayed as customs and all border force agencies become tied up having to process some 4 million new vehicle crossings per year.
So John's asking, will animal and plant-based products from the EU need additional checks and documentation before being granted a release into the UK?
In this short, no. HMRC have agreed that these types of products, provided that they are of EU origin, will be treated as trusted. However, it is likely that in the future, this interim measure will be revisited.
We currently import goods into the UK using the GSP scheme to reduce our duty. What is likely to happen to this?
It has been announced that the GSP scheme will remain in place as it is now, and we expect further updates in regards to this over the coming months. So now we're going to go on to some more questions in terms of what's been coming through in the last 10 minutes. Paula has asked, do we need to register for TSP if using a customs agency? The short answer is no. Right now, TSP is only available for traders. If using a freight forwarder, they can submit a full declaration on your behalf. So the choice is really yours. Another question from Paul, how much do you think TSP guarantee would amount to? Right now, there is no guarantee, but it's been announced that in the next 3 to 6 months, as HMRC revisits these procedures, this will become clearer. They've given an indicative date by June of this to be the case. I have already a duty deferment account. Shall the TSP not transit to this automatically? Unfortunately not for the first 3 to 6 months. However, if you have a deferment account, frontier entries might be favourable for yourself. After the webinar, George will reach out to you to discuss the options that exist. Mike has asked, if volumes of import and export transactions are relatively low, is it worth volume of transactions are relatively high, is it worth registering ourselves for NES to do our own entries to become a more efficient customs controlled party? The realities are, it's not just the system cost that amounts to something, it's actually the cost of setting up and running the specialist software, and also the specialist cost of the training and compliance costs. We'll reach out after the webinar to give you some information on integrations and potential ideas to reduce the overall cost. Quite a detailed question next. We transfer stock from the Netherlands using T1 and T2 transit documents. We have a UK EORI, and usually customs agents are currently completing our import declarations on our behalf on direct imports from the non-EU before Brexit. Shall we apply for transitional simplified procedures in this case, or can we just use our customs agent? As I said, it's quite a tricky question to answer on a webinar. We'll reach out separately to discuss more details as we have a few ideas. However, if transferring stock from the Netherlands to the UK, a full declaration will likely be required at the border. And the final question for all we've got time for on this 20-minute webinar: when calculating import duty, what freight elements do we include? Do we need to include the cost from unloading the vessels at the UK port? It's quite a straightforward question. Obviously, it's the value of the goods plus the freight support plus insurance to make up your overall customs value. As we've said, it was only going to be a 20-minute webinar. That is all we have time for. I can see that we've had another 17 questions in. What we'll be doing for those that we've not been able to answer the questions on, we'll be reaching out over the coming days via email. In terms of Unsworth, please do get in touch. As a business, we recognise that the role of a freight forwarder is changing. It's a challenging time to be an importer, an exporter, or even a freight forwarder and a customs agent. Growing digitalisation in our industry and our customers now are expecting more. The transparency of information, recognising that data is king, especially leading towards this Brexit scenario, and the use of this data is what's allowing us to better advise our customers. We are trying to set ourselves apart from what is a very opaque industry, and we continue to try and lead the way as a business. What we actively encourage you to do is contact us for Brexit support. You can contact me directly on my email or visit our website for regular updates as they happen. At this stage, we're not planning to run an additional webinar, but we will reassess that towards March as things progress. As once again, if you've got any further questions, please do submit them by the question mechanism and we will get back to you. Or you can email us directly and book some time in with one of our team who can spend some time running through your Brexit planning measures. Thank you very much.